Hello, guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Monster Families. Today, we're going to be looking at one of the most prolific necromancer killers in Diablo 2, and there's a reason for it. And that is known as the cats. There's a couple different variations of them. In fact, there's a lot of variations of them. There is, of course, the slingers, the spear cats, the night slingers, the hell slingers. There is also a potion variant of this particular version, two different potion variants, and there is also the melee version, which uses a whip. I'm going to include them all together here because they're basically all the same exact monster with the exception of what weapon they're using. And I don't really think it's worth the time to make multiple videos on every single one of them. Now, there are a couple reasons why they're really nasty. First off, they tend to be really fast. One of the things I've noticed about these guys is they do tend to run really quickly and they surround you in a relatively fast fashion. Now, the whip versions aren't the most annoying versions. The actual like slinger versions are definitely a lot more annoying than the whip versions, but they can both be particularly nasty. Right here, I have access to one of the spear versions. And one of the things that I want to show you about the spear versions is that they actually have the ability to pierce. So if you watch closely, you'll clearly see that he throws the javelin through my mercenary and hits me. And this is actually very important for necromancers because necromancers tend to rely on their minions to stay alive. And one of the biggest issues with these guys is, well, they pretty much don't care that your minions exist. This means that they have the ability to throw their javelin through your minions and still hit you on the other side. And I'm not entirely convinced that even when it hits you, you'll notice that the javelin stops when it hits you specifically. I'm not entirely convinced that it even stops when it hits you. I'm pretty sure it also pierces when it hits you. It's just visually preventing it from continuing, but I'm pretty sure it still actually continues, much the same way in PvP, where you'll have invisible projectiles that will hit you, and you don't know exactly what projectiles they are because they no longer have a physical like form or shape, but you're still getting hit by them and taking damage. Which makes them extremely deadly for necromancers. Casters in general tend to be pretty nasty with them, but necromancers in particular tend to rely on their army to absorb attacks. And any attack, doesn't really matter what it is. If it hits your minions, then it's a very good chance that it won't hit you. But the thing about the spear cats is their spears go straight through your minions, which means that all of that beautiful meat shield that you have accumulated, your like 17 or 18 skeletons, your skeleton mages, your maybe like 100 revives if you've got like that many points in your revive skill. Doesn't matter how big or how wide or how vast your army is, the slingers will just pierce right through them and basically kill everyone, which is really annoying. And as a necromancer, you don't really have defense. You don't really have physical resistance, and you don't really tend to build block chance. So you are extremely weak to essentially everything that the slingers are. High physical damage, high, like general attack rating. They're going to slice right through you. You're not going to be able to block the attacks. It's all very nasty. On top of this, they also have the ability to crit as well. So if you pay attention, you will actually see the crit effect. Let me go ahead and kill these guys real quick so I can show you this. But if you're fighting the monsters and a monster crits you, there's actually a specific graphic that appears on your character when that happens. So as an example, it's probably better just to use the ones in Act 5 at this point. As an example, let's use these spear cats right here. So let's let them attack me. And what you'll notice is that eventually you'll see this little orange kind of a circle appear on my character. And this means that they were able to obtain a crit. It doesn't happen every single time, so you're not going to have the crit occur every single time they attack you. But when it does happen, it's going to double the physical damage that they deal to you, which is, of course, not going to be pleasant for especially necromancers, who are extremely weak to that particular variety of damage. And, of course, these guys may have a lower crit percentage than the ones in Act 5 Hell. It's not necessarily data that I actually have available to me on their actual percentages. And, of course, they do have to actually hit me. There you go. We just saw one right there. That was definitely one of the crit notifiers. If you've never actually seen the crit notifier showing that you've obtained a crit, it's not exactly a very long or very like dramatic graphic. It's just a very simple graphic of like a orange circle that sort of explodes outward, kind of like a little miniature sun exploding. And once you see it for the first time, you'll notice it pretty basically every time. But I'm sure I could pull up a graphic for you. Of what it looks like when a crit occurs. And it looks basically something like this. It's like a little orange thing that shows up, and it just sort of does like a little explosion. Now, it doesn't happen all the time with these guys, but it's enough that it can potentially catch you off guard when it does happen. So what does this potentially mean? Well, this is a high physical damage character. It does a lot of damage. Javelins are particularly high physical damage. And because javelins are particularly high physical damage when they hit you, and they crit, that doubles the damage, which can catch you off guard. So you might think that you're absolutely fine. You might take a hit, and it only does like half your HP in damage or something, and you can pot away or lifesteal yourself back to recovery. But that crit that will happen every occasionally, that's a funny way of putting it. Oh, it's two right in a row there. Did you see that? When it happens occasionally, it will double the damage and potentially kill you instantly. So do be aware as a weak melee character like a Necromancer that these guys are nasty. Now, they come in multiple varieties, not just the Spearcat variety. They also come in the Whip version, which you can see right here. This is the Whip version. Relatively simple monsters. They just run up and they slap you down, and really not a lot more to say other than that. They do have some modifiers, and we'll talk about those later. Now, there is another version, actually two other versions, of the Slinger variety. And I'm going to take you over to see the other versions of the Slinger variety. These are actually pretty cool. They're one of the few monsters in the game that actually utilize potions. So there's two versions. There is the exploding potion version, and there is the poison potion version. So occasionally, for some reason or another, the spear cats, which are known as slingers, can sometimes spawn with potions instead of spears. And this is one of those varieties. So if you end up with the potion versions, these are the ones that are going to be throwing the potions at you. And I'm pretty sure they actually have the actual potions that you can find throughout the game. I think there's one like over here on the ground somewhere, but we're talking about the, like the exploding potions, the there's like 5 or 6 different varieties of them actually. I'm not sure exactly which ones they're using out of the lot, but the exploding potions are AoE, as you can clearly see. They do little explosions. They also throw for quite some distance before they hit you, and they're fire damage. The poison ones are particularly nasty because they make a huge cloud, and there's a very good chance that they'll crit poison you, which is absolutely nasty. All the slingers, honestly, all the slinger varieties are just disgusting. These can be particularly deadly to a necromancer with low resistances as well. And they also avoid attacking your minions. For some reason or another, the slingers specifically seem like they target the player over other monsters, similar to the leapers, which tend to target players over other monsters. And because they target the player over other, like NPCs, like minions, golems, skeletons, revives, etc., they just tend to be relatively nasty for characters that hide in the back behind their army, which, cough, cough, necromancer. This variety right here, not as bad as the poison one, I feel like. Poison one is even more annoying because of the way that crit poison works in this game, and it's so very common for you to have like a monster crit poison you. I can't even count how many times I've been hit with a poison. Poison touches me, and my HP just drops like to 0 immediately. Well, to 1. You can't technically die from poison, but that doesn't mean you're not running around with 1 HP and like getting murdered. Now, to make things more complicated, slingers and saber cats both have different variations that include other elements. So not only do they do high physical damage, but night tigers and hellcats, which are the whip versions, can do cold damage in Nightmare in Hell, and the hellcats can do fire damage in Nightmare in Hell, which means that not only do they do physical damage, but they also do another element type. The slingers also have the same thing. So the Slingers and the Spear Cats have chances to do cold damage in Nightmare in Hell, which means that they're doing high physical damage and high cold damage. And the Hell Slingers have a chance to do fire damage in Nightmare in Hell, which can further compound things because even if your Necromancer has, say, decent amount of physical resistance, they're still going to be hitting you with a high amount of elemental damage as well, which can also be nasty. And I'm pretty sure that the poison potions and the fire potions, for some reason, also include this damage. So if they're throwing the fire potions at you, the fire potions can indeed slow you with the cold damage, which I believe I've actually had this happen before, where literally you're running along in an area as a melee character trying to fight these things, and they are freezing you all the time or chilling you essentially with the cold damage from their potions. And there's absolutely no way for you to get away from it because the explosions are AoE and you can't even dodge the attacks. So you just end up permanently chilled essentially the entire time while you're fighting these guys, unless you can get cannot be frozen, which is really annoying. Their resistances and their HP all seem to be about the same. The Sabre Cats, the whip version, do have a slightly higher HP than the Slinger versions, but not by much. They're both around 2,000 to 5,000 HP, with the Slingers being slightly lower, and that puts them on the rather low side. In comparison to one of the weaker monsters in the game, for instance, the Fallen, which are like literally one of the weakest monsters in the game, they have 1,000 to 3,273 HP, and the Slingers are within that range, if not a little bit higher, but it generally means that they're pretty easy to kill. They're just really nasty in terms of their speed and their overall offensive prowess. The whip versions do have 15% damage resistance, and the Slinger versions have 10. They're very close together, actually. They both have no magic resistance. They both tend to have very low fire resistance, except for in Hell difficulty, where the Sabre Cats are immune to fire. And the Slingers tend to have really low fire resistance, except for the Hell Slingers, which are immune to fire. Most of the resistances tend to be relatively low, and even in Hell difficulty, they all have only 25%. There is a guest version, which is pretty similar as well. 50% fire, 50% cold, 50% lightning, 50% poison, 50% damage resistance. Honestly, the guest version seems a hell of a lot stronger than any of the original versions. The guest version also has the ability to deal poison damage instead of cold and fire, and there is a cold version as well. So there is a specific version in the guest, which is known as the Huntress, which actually has the poison modifier, which makes them nasty. You may have noticed, actually, when you've been playing the game, especially in Hell difficulty, that like it seems like every monster chills you, and you don't know why, right? You're like that monster wasn't doing any cold damage. That monster wasn't doing any cold damage. Like, why am I constantly being chilled? Well, believe it or not, like a lot of monsters in the game just have like an additional chance to hit you with cold damage or an additional chance to hit you with poison damage. And so you'll find that a lot of the monsters in the game just have these innate bonuses to dish out additional damage types. And the Sabre Cats are one of these types. For the Slingers, which are guest monsters in Act 5 as well, and some of the more notoriously nasty versions, by the way, are in Act 5. They are also capable of multiple different element types. So the Bloody Foothills ones, the ones that like you will lament life when you fight, when you're going for Shank, or like when you're fighting Eldritch, you'll find them at the waypoint sometimes. They actually deal lightning damage as an additional. They also have the ability to pierce, and they can spawn in really large numbers down there. They can also spawn in Frigid Highlands, where Eldritch is, and those deal cold damage. And then they have another spawn in Ariat Plateau, and those deal fire damage. So they're literally all three elements. And they pierce, and they do high physical damage, and they're just really nasty. I generally don't like fighting these things on pretty much any character, honestly, because when they are in well-organized groups, as it says here, they will absolutely annihilate you. Because if you have, like, say, 50 spears coming at you, good luck dodging 50 spears. They have the ability to deadly strike, as I've shown earlier, and they also have all this additional elemental damage, so you better have your resistances in check. If you're in Bloody Foothills, you better have your lightning res. If you're in Frigid Highlands, you better have your cold resistance. And if you're in Area Plateau, you better have your fire resistance, because they're going to bypass your physical resistance. Like if you have really nice physical res, they're going to bypass that to your elemental resistance, and they're going to deal lots of damage that way as well, which generally just makes them really nasty monsters. It says tips and other additional information. Take care of these quickly or run away. um, I don't really know what else there is to say about these guys. They're nasty. I don't like them. They generally don't tend to be too much of an issue if you have high defense. Another interesting thing about these is because almost every single one of these variants has additional damage of cold or fire or lightning or poison of some type. You can actually use MDR, magic damage reduced, on these guys, as well as physical damage reduced, to help a lot with these attacks. Magic damage reduced and physical damage reduced kind of cover each other in some ways. So if you have high amounts of both, the javelins tend to be kind of absorbed into the PDR and the MDR, which is very helpful, especially since they generally do both element damage and physical damage. Another really good way to deal with these guys is just high defense. If you have really high defense and really high block chance, you can generally avoid most of the damage of these guys entirely, because, well, they can't hit you. Their attack rating is right here if you're ever interested in looking. In Hell difficulty, they have 4,666, 4,390 to 4,666 attack rating, which means that you need enough defense to basically make it so that they can't hit you, which isn't actually that hard. If you have around like 8,000 plus, 8,000 plus defense would be enough to put you in a range where they're not going to hit you every single time. And if you're around 15k plus, they're probably not going to be able to touch you at all, which is really why slingers tend to be more deadly toward necromancers, because necromancers have no defense. And they generally don't have any way to get defense either, unless they're using something like fortitude, and I don't know why you would use fortitude on a necromancer. Overall, they're all over the place. They're all over the place in Act 2, and they're all over the place in Act 5, and they're just nasty wherever you find them. They do tend to be very aggressive as well. You will find yourself surrounded by the whip monsters and surrounded by the spear cats at relatively quick succession. They do exist, I think, in even in the sewers, I believe. I'm pretty sure they're in Act 2 sewers as well. So they're in Act 2 sewers, they're in Act 2 Rocky Waste, Act 2 Stony, I think they're in Stony Tomb. They're definitely in Dry Hills. And they have like 3 areas in Act 5 as well. The whip versions, I think, are probably the easiest to kill. They do tend to be nasty, but they are relatively easy to kill. The spear cat ones, though, dear Lord Jesus, the spear cat ones can be extremely difficult to kill if you don't have the defensive capability to essentially take the spears directly to your face. That's really the only way that I can explain it, is that usually when you're fighting the spear cat versions, you're going to get hit. And if you can't take the spears directly to your face, you're probably going to die. Either that or learn how to dance. The only problem with that is that their spears are not always visible. And I think that's one of the biggest issues, is that not only are they kind of hard to see, but they're also sometimes invisible depending on whether or not they hit a target, which causes them to cease to be visible. So in the case when they hit me, as an example, you see like a spear hit me. Right? The spear disappears when it hits me. But that doesn't mean that the spear is gone. And so technically the spear is still traveling, which means that you could potentially be hit by an invisible spear, which means that dancing isn't always a good option to avoid the spears, because some of the spears are not visible in the first place to actually be able to dodge. So you're going to be hit by things that you cannot see. And as you can see, once you have a significantly large number of spear cats in an area throwing spears at you, it can become extremely difficult to dodge that many spears coming at you at once. Especially when you're running around like a crackhead and they're just spread all over the place like freaking peanut butter on a sandwich. I think that's pretty much it when it comes to these guys. They're not particularly the strongest monsters. They do have some things that they're resistant to, like some of them are immune to cold. One of them is immune to lightning. Some of them have high resistances, like the ones in hell difficulty tend to be more evil. In general, if you look at the resistances of the Hell versions versus the resistances of the Act Two versions, the Act Two versions tend to be very weak, and the guest monster versions that are in Act Five tend to be extremely strong. High physical resistance, decent poison, decent lightning, decent cold, decent fire, like across the board, and just generally much stronger monsters in general. Um, I'm trying to think if there's anything else to go over with these guys. I don't really think there is. I did notice that the Hellcat version does have 30% block chance, and that's not the right one. Yeah, that's the highest block chance out of all of them. Apparently, is the Hellcat. Because even the guest versions that are in Hell difficulty only have 19% block chance, and most of the Act 2 versions have 15 to 25. And the Night Tiger and the Hellcat seem to have the highest block chance out of all of them, which could make them a little bit more tanky versus melees, but not much. Physical damage resistance. It's crazy though, because like the Act 2 versions have 15% physical damage resistance, and the guest versions have 50% physical resistance, and the slingers have 25% physical resistance. They definitely beefed them up for hell difficulty. I mean, just looking at their stats across the board, like the hell versions are just incredibly tankier. The only like tiny thing that I'm noticing here about the hell versions versus the others is it does seem like the slingers in Act 2 have higher attack rating than the slingers in Hell. For some reason, they brought the attack rating down. I guess they thought they were hitting too often. I don't know. As always, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe button if you enjoy the content. If you like these deep dives on the monster families. This is my full-time job, so I appreciate any support you're willing to give. And as always, keep watching.